We are in the next lesson in our study of Trail of Blood. It feels like it's been a few weeks since we started this, or since we were on this. So we'll get back at it. We are going to take a little bit of a break from the book a little bit. We're still going to be in it. We're definitely going to be talking about it, but we are definitely going to go a little more in depth on some other elements that were going on. So how many people have one? Everyone should have one. We finished up the last one. You guys good? You have one? Everyone have one? Okay, good. Thank you guys for passing those out. We are in lesson 6. Trail of Blood, our church's heritage. So we are going to start on page 2. We are taking a skew off of our Trail of Blood timeline to look at the beginnings of another movement that was going on in the Middle East. Now this is our timeline. For those who don't remember, our timeline is right here in the back of the book. Pulls out, nice and handy. And so we're sort of there, but we're going to be taking a little break from that study, and we're going to be sort of right here in about the 7th century to start off. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to take a little break on what was going on in the Middle East at the time. Now, there was plenty going on across the world. Were there things going on in China? Were there things going on in South America? Yes, absolutely. We're relating this to what God has in store. So God's plan, always remember the theater is always the Middle East. And so as we see things developing up in Europe and even a little further down, we see God's plan also taking shape in the Middle East as well. And as we talk about this, I want us to remember current events. I want us to remember the things that we're seeing and hearing about today. So much of it is very similar. This movement begins in the 7th century, around 610 AD, but has its roots actually much further back than that. This lesson will focus on how Islam began, what influences it had on the known world at the time, how it grew, where it came from, and how it will play a major role in our study of end times. But we really need to go back to the beginning. So we're going to go all the way back to Genesis, where the roots truly are. So let's begin our lesson with, ridiculous, just bad grammar, bad chat GPT. No, just kidding. Let's begin our lesson with the son of Abraham, Ishmael. Who is Ishmael and how did he come to be? How many people have heard of Ishmael? Abraham's son, Ishmael. Yes? Okay, good. So let's go back. Genesis chapter 12. To understand Ishmael, we need to go to the story of Abraham, because Ishmael's story started back when God beckoned Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12. Verse 1 reads, "Now the Lord has said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you. I'll curse him who curses you, and in all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Now, we studied this a little bit on Wednesday night, the Abrahamic covenant. And God's dealing with Abraham specifically. God has something in mind when it comes to Abraham. He's got a covenant people. He's got covenant promises. He's got blessings. He's got this whole plan in mind. Like what we saw this morning. He knew by converting Saul, he already knew what was going to happen. He'll stand before kings. He'll stand before the children of Israel. He'll stand before the Gentiles. God already knew what was going to happen. So when he calls Abram to create a covenant with Abram now, we see him making these promises. Okay, so he's making the promises with Abraham, establishing this covenant with Abraham. Okay. You follow me, get out of your country, there's a land I'm going to give you, etc., etc. He also says he's going to make him a great nation. Well, now, as you see at the top of page 3, Sarah, Abraham's wife, was barren at the time. The couple had no children, so it's hard to make a great nation from people who don't have kids. And so that's where we see God's providence coming in. So even though God reiterated his promise to Abraham in a lavish covenant ceremony, which we can read about in Genesis 15, the couple attempted to help God fulfill his promise. Abraham accepted, and let's go over to Genesis 16. Genesis 16. 16:1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children." Now remember, she's aware of what's happening too. So she's aware of God's plan. She's hearing, she knows about this covenant. She knows about the great nation. She has no children. And so she's saying, well, here's one way to jump ahead. "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Now we're going to be in Genesis 16, so you can definitely keep your place there. I think a lot of these verses I've printed. But how many people know this story? How many people have heard this story? Okay, these events, not story. Trying to break that habit. How many people know these events? Okay. So at the time, this really was just a form of surrogacy. Obviously, there was no surgery being done. The idea was you have a child with her, but it will become mine. It will raise that child together as if it were our own. And so this was really surrogacy at the time, with the child being considered Abraham and Sarah's child. However, things didn't turn out as planned. When Hagar discovered she was pregnant, she actually despised her mistress. Abraham assured Sarah that Hagar was free to do anything she wanted. Hagar fled from Sarah. So let's go to Genesis 16, 4 through 6, which is at the bottom of page 3. So he went into Hagar, she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. And Sarah said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. So there's already this discontent between the two. And I think as we relate this to our lives today, we often see this. Sometimes we jump ahead of God. Sometimes we don't allow God's plan to play out. We jump ahead. We try to force things. We try to make things. We try to take that wheel. And I think that's what's happening here. I think it's all of God's providence, because God works around our mistakes sometimes. How easy would it have been for Saul to have just been converted from the very beginning, but he wasn't. How easy would it have been for him to capture him right away, to keep Peter from falling away, to keep these others from falling away, but he doesn't. He allows mistakes, and then God works around it. I think to show his providence, okay, to show God's power in all of this. So, any questions so far? Mostly just reading so far. So, what does she do? She sends her away. "Flee, get out, get away from me. I no longer want you in my presence." So in verse 7, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going?" And she said, "I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai." Angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child. You shall bear a son, shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." She called the name of the Lord who spoke. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." For she said, have I also seen him who sees me. Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Pastor, why are we studying this? I learned this in Sunday school. Great. There's obviously a plan to this, okay? We're going way back to see what eventually happens. And so I like verse 12, verse 11 and verse 12. The angel of the Lord calls his shot with who the descendants of Hagar are going to be. Behold, you are with child, shall bear a son, call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. And then he goes on to describe who he will become, sort of his character traits, right? If you were to look around and say, well, your character traits are this, or Brother Eric's pretty chill for the most part, ish. Sean's pretty relaxed for the most part. Brother Frank's kind of uptight, right? Those are all, no, just kidding. Those are all things that we would use to describe. You might say, I just kind of talk a lot or whatever. I would say Zion's always smiling. That's always good, right? You're always kind of smiley, except for when she's looking at me. So those are character traits. Those are things so when the angel says he'll be a wild man, it kind of gives you a little clue into some characteristics. His hand shall be against every man. What do you think of when you hear that? What's a term? Well, what's another way of maybe saying that? Give me a follow-up term with that. His hand shall be against every man.
He doesn't like anybody.
Doesn't like anyone. Hand oftentimes usually means combat. Big
war.
Yeah, war, sort of against people, sort of that confrontational, chip on shoulder kind of thing. And then every man's hand against him. So he's just that. Does anyone work with that guy who's just not likable? There's just someone you work with. You're just like, meh, this guy just rubs people the wrong way, right? Guy or girl? Just Mother's Day, so. The guy just rubs people the wrong way. Like, I don't like this guy. He's that cranky guy. And he's always fighting with someone, and people are always fighting with him. He's always looking for a fight, And so that's what we see. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Again, we're going to come back to all this. All this is going to play beautifully into where we're going. So Abram, we have a timeline. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So Hagar, pregnant, gets confronted by the angel of the Lord, says, go back. Obviously, she's accepted back. The baby is born. They have a name. Okay, who wants to take 16 through 20?
Hagar was out in the wilderness when God, ever trustworthy, saw her. The Lord spoke to her and promised that her descendants would be multiplied. Ishmael's name means God hears. Hagar referred to God as a seeing God and referred to the location as Beer Road at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Hagar obeyed God, planning and returned to Abraham and Sarah. She gave birth to a son whom she named Ishmael, as God had commanded.
Okay. Who has 21 through 24, please?
God gave Abraham the sign of circumcision about 13 years after Ishmael was born. God reminded Abraham of his promise, telling him that Sarah would bear a son and that her descendants would be rulers. Abraham's affection for Ishmael was clear from the moment he met him. Shall a child be born to a father who is 100 years old? He muttered to himself and chuckled. Is it possible for Sarah, who is 90 years old, to have a child? Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Abraham prayed to God. God's promise looked too good to be true, and Abraham truly cared about Ishmael.
I don't think there's any doubt that Abraham cared about Ishmael. That's his son. Whatever means by which it happened, it's still his son. And so God is making it clear that he has a plan for Ishmael. Now, he's made it clear to Abraham that God's original plan isn't going to go through Ishmael, but he's going to bless Ishmael, okay? So he's going to bless him. He talks about him being a mighty nation. God even institutes the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision, to Ishmael at age 13. In chapter 17, verse 17 and 18, Abraham fell on his face and laughed. When God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name, and I'll bless her and give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. King of peoples shall be from her." And Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." So it shows Abraham's connection to Ishmael and desire for Ishmael to be maybe the one that God is moving toward. God is saying no. God has his reasons. And so he's saying, God says, "No, Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I'll establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant," verse 21, "I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time next year." So God's made it pretty clear what the plan is going to be. Okay? Again, keep all of this in mind as we study this, because there are different versions of this that exist out there that aren't as absolute when it comes to what God's plan was. Any questions on any of that so far? All right. We'll just go a few more minutes because I know people have plans and I know everyone's tired. So we'll go a few more minutes and then we'll call it good. All right. Who would like to read 25 to the bottom of the page, please?
"No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac," God said. "I'm going to make my promise with him, an everlasting covenant for his descendants. I have heard you about Ishmael, and I have blessed him, and I will make him fertile and multiply him much. I will make him into a powerful nation by having him father 12 princes. But I will make my promise with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you next year at this time." But God did not ignore Ishmael, even though Isaac was to be the son through whom the Messiah, Jesus, would be descended and through whom God would fulfill his covenant with Abraham. When Abraham was 100, Sarah conceived and Isaac was born. When Isaac was weaned, perhaps around the age of 3 or 4, Sarah noticed Ishmael, who probably about 17 years old at the time, taunting him. Hagar and Ishmael should be expelled, and she told Abraham. Abraham was furious, but God ordered him to follow Sarah's instructions. Abraham got up early in the morning and provided provisions for Hagar and Ishmael. Mother and son roamed the desert until they ran out of water and resources and were on the verge of dying.
Okay. So, Ishmael's picking on Isaac. How do we feel about that? Couple of brothers. I have 2 younger brothers. I picked on them a lot. They picked on me is what I meant to say. I picked on them quite a bit. We all picked on each other. It's just how it is, right? Brothers, it's just the way it is. I know Brother Frank, Sister Sonia, your boys don't do that with each other, but most boys do pick on each other. In this case, we've got a 17-year-old, probably about a 17-year-old picking on a 4-year-old. That doesn't seem right, but nonetheless picking at him, is taunting him. And it probably wasn't a one-time instance. It was probably continual, so much so that it caused Sarah to want to, I wanted her gone before, right? Now she's back and she's had this son and Ruth raised him and all of that. But I need them to go. So if we go over to Genesis 21, let's go over there. We'll read a few of these verses. Genesis 21. Verse 5, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. So she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne him a son in his old age. So again, we know this. I mean, it's always a challenge for older people to have children. In this case, 100 is much older. 90 is much older, and certainly not an expectation. I think, once again, it's God, right? The easy route is to, here, take my handmaid, have a child, everything goes for him. That's the easy way. But God allows Israel to get captured to be in Egypt so God can release them from Egypt, right? God allows Saul to do what Saul does in order for it to be God's providence to turn him around. God makes the impossible possible. That's what he does. And so here he has a 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman having a child. And not just a child, but as we go to Matthew 1 and we see, we know the lineage, Isaac is right there. The Christ, the Messiah, is going to come through Isaac. Not Ishmael, Isaac. And so that's what we see the promise. God made it clear, that's the promise. Ishmael's great, we're going to make him a great nation, he'll be taken care of. All right, we see that. And they're definitely they're a mighty nation, a large nation. But the promises that God promised Abraham were always going to come through Isaac. So the child grew, was weaned. Verse 8, Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Who would have known it was going to be a Mother's Day Sunday school class? How about that, huh? Listen to the mom. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed. So as we fast forward in time, both of these now existing religions both claim Abraham as their father. They have no problem with Abraham because they both have lineage back to him. Okay. Where were we? Yet I'll make a nation. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, putting it on her shoulder. He gave it and the boy to Hagar, sent her away. She departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So that is where we'll go a few more minutes. So they're on their way. They're wandering in the wilderness. Has anyone ever gone hiking or backpacking and had a thermos of water? I've heard about it. I've never done. Duh. At some point, that water is going to run out. Okay, and so that's what we see happening here in Genesis chapter 21. So let's keep reading. Someone take 32 through 36, please.
Hagar walked away from Ishmael and grieved, not wanting to see him die. And God heard the boy's voice, and God's angel called to Hagar from heaven. He inquired as to what was bothering Hagar and assured her that God had heard her. He promised her that he would return Ishmael into a powerful nation. In addition, he showed her a well of water. Ishmael and Hagar relied on God's provision for their survival. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He spent his life in the woods, honing his bow skills. He resided in the Paran wilderness, and his mother brought him a wife from Egypt.
Okay, go ahead and take 36 too.
Although Ishmael is not of the offspring of God's promise to Abraham, God's benefits for Ishmael were realized.
Okay, again, this is an easy fix. God could have at any point killed Ishmael, could have easily killed Hagar, could have allowed Hagar to be gone. God did not have to interrupt Hagar, who was out in the wilderness, to bring her back. God did not have to institute the covenant of circumcision with him as well, which he does at the age of 13. God also can allow him to die in the wilderness, but God is once again interrupting. God has a plan, and God's plan is always going to take precedence. And I think the sooner, we sort of realize that even all of this that we're seeing today is all part of God's plan. As crazy and as mind-numbingly painful sometimes it is to look around and see the world as it is, God has a plan for all of this. God has a plan. He's knocking over domino after domino. He's getting there little by little. Time and people, even technology, is all catching up to what God eventually wants to do. And so the easy route, snuff out Ishmael, no problems, no issues, no real enemies, at least a strong enemy like this to Israel. God can easily just work his plan right through Isaac. Ishmael's not a thing. I've killed him. He's gone. But that's not what God wants. Again, God is showing his power. And he's using people to do it. He's using people to reveal the fact that he is God. Okay, any other thoughts on that? Okay, 37 says, God promised that Ishmael would become a mighty nation, and even today we see that he is the ancestors of most Arabs. We saw in Genesis 16, 10 through 12, that he has a large family and a large number of descendants. Even today there is still conflict between Ishmael's descendants and Isaac's descendants. I think that's probably putting it mildly. It's always funny to me. I don't think it's not funny. I just think it's ironic. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think in our Wednesday night lesson. There's a battle over this small piece of land. Okay, it really is a battle. I mean, these guys are fighting tooth and nail over every grain of sand, which is over in that area. But it's about power. It's about dominance. It's about one-upping the other. It's about taking over that area, taking over that land, having that dominant position. And I think that's what we saw with Isaac and Ishmael even back then. I think I've told you this story. We used to pick on my youngest brother quite a bit. He had gotten a brand new poster, and we sprayed it with a water bottle just because we were punks. We just wanted to mess with our youngest brother. And so here's a $10 Bo Jackson poster that got crinkled and ruined and was falling off of the wall because we just wanted to show dominance. We didn't get a poster. Of course, it was his birthday, but nonetheless, we didn't get a poster, so we ruined his. It's just stupid things that kids do. And maybe this was kiddish behavior, but this was a foreshadow of what's to come. And if we need a foreshadow of how much these guys don't like each other, go to any news app ever right now and see that these guys don't like each other. And so when we hear chants like from the river to the sea, when we hear chants about eradicate Israel, death to Zionism, when we hear those types of chants, those should perk us up. Those should make our ears stand up a little bit more, because we're talking about these descendants, this great nation. They want to have that dominant position over Israel. So again, as we've talked about a few times, this is really an Isaac versus Ishmael battle that's going on for this dominant position. Even today, there's still conflict between Ishmael's descendants and Isaac's descendants. According to biblical tradition, historical interpretation, the descendants of Ishmael are considered to be the Arab people. This is based on genealogies, narratives in the Bible, other historical records, suggesting that Ishmael's offspring settled in the Arabian Peninsula. This lineage also plays a significant role in Islamic tradition, as Ishmael in Islamic tradition is regarded as an ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad, further linking him to the Arab nations. According to Genesis 25, 12 through 18, Ishmael's sons became the leaders of the 12 tribes across the Arabian Peninsula, thus linking him to these Arab nations. The Bible describes Ishmael's descendants as living in hostility with all their kin, a prophecy indicating their widespread influence and turbulent interactions. This connection is also significant in Islamic tradition, further reinforcing his importance in Arab history and culture. So we're going to stop right there. But just know that this has roots in it. Just like with anything else, this has roots dating back, as we're looking at the book of Genesis. There it is. It's right there. This isn't any other book. It's just the roots of this are right there in the book of Genesis. Any questions or thoughts? Ishmael. What went wrong? Poor guy. Yeah.
You know, you see what the Jews have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
And not only when they were younger in the Bible, but you see what they went through in World War I,
Mm-hmm.
World War II, and now they want to annihilate them again.
Yeah.
And yet they're still standing.
Yeah.
And now we have all these kids in these colleges that think that Ishmael's tribe is more important than Israel.
Yeah.
Which means that 95% of those kids don't know one thing
Correct.
about the Bible and didn't listen to their history and grammar.
Right.
It's
Well,
pathetic.
Or it's just a general wave of sheepish behavior, meaning everyone else is doing it, so I got to go. I know I've mentioned Ukraine. Nothing wrong, Ukraine. If you support the war in Ukraine, that's not a problem. But everyone changed their profile picture to a Ukrainian flag. Everyone supported Ukraine without really knowing what that was or what it meant. Everyone's supporting Palestine without really knowing what that means. Like, what does that mean when you support Palestine? What does that mean when you're talking about really another Holocaust? The Holocaust is being viewed has historically been viewed as something that's terrible. Gas chambers and firing ranges and, just going into homes and separating families and killing 6 million Jews during World War II, during that time. And Hitler's viewed as a villain, as he should be. Hitler was not a nice guy. He went after the Jews and pursued them. But the wording that's being talked about now is exactly the same kind of wording. And in the same way Hitler went after young people, this movement is also going after young people. Because with young people, you can create that sort of followers mentality, and then you create loyalty. And so we're seeing this Palestinian movement and this movement to eradicate the Jews even more so happening now, and people just falling in line with it because everyone else is doing it. Like I told you, we're seeing people chanting other things. We're seeing people chant the Green New Deal or tax breaks or kill the rich. And that has nothing to do with going into Rafah. Like that, like they don't even care about that. They don't care about tax corporations and tear the system down and putting a Palestinian flag on George Washington's statue. What do they care about that? This is about them, the descendants of Ishmael, eradicating the descendants of Isaac. And I really kind of wish it was more complicated than that, but it's really not. When we break it down, that's really what we're looking at. They don't like each other. And it always has seemed when Israel counter punches, when they get punched at, it's just like that bully. We always taught the kids, never be the first one to hit, but be the last one to hit, right? Don't ever go and instigate anything. But if that person punches you, go get him. Go get him, especially stand up for your siblings. But whenever Israel counterpunches, like we're seeing now, look how bad they are, right? It's that bully who gets punched back and then goes and tattles to the teacher. But that bully's been instigating this whole time, over and over and over and over. Israel finally's had enough. You're attacking us on October 7th. And yet we go to fire back, and now we're the bad guys. So we're seeing this animus growing toward Israel, and it's unfounded and uneducated. It's uneducated because it's just people following the crowd. Oh, they're going this way. Oh, they're going this way. It's like that school of fish in Nemo. I mean, it probably really exists in nature too, but I only know it from Nemo. Where a bunch of fish follow, shoom, shoom, there they go. They're all just doing the same thing. So a few years ago, it was a different cause. A few years ago before that, it was a different cause. Years before that, it was a different cause. There's always something. Everyone's always mad. Why is everyone always mad? Right? They don't have to be mad. Have some peace. Find some peace in Christ. Instead of just being mad all the time. Everyone's mad. Gotta fight the man, fight the cause. Why? Chill out a little bit. Find some peace. So that's not what's going to happen. It's actually going to get worse, but a lot of mad people out there. Why do you got to be so mad? Yo, bro, chill out. Find Christ. Amazing what peace will do. So, any other questions, comments? Yeah.
So, not really know a lot about the Muslim religion, but as we were kind of going through this, I was wondering, especially since we see these protests, and a lot of it is women and these alternative lifestyles, and really supporting this, and we know that religion has suppressed, obviously, women and stuff like that. Does any of that have to do with, because we both believe that Abraham is the father, but Ishmael comes from a servant.
Yeah.
So does it kind of link that is that where they get their no respect for maybe women from?
That isn't where they get it from, but I'm sure that plays a part. Yeah. Well, no, and that's good because you're going to see that going forward as we fast forward in time, as they continue to develop. We're going to see them in what we're going to define as a polytheistic society. And it's going to take one person, and the best way to rally army-aged men is to give them promises and power that are really out of your control. But that's how you cultishly give people who will fight for you what they want. That was a long answer, and it really took a lot out of me. But does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yes, what you're talking about, yes, there could be some elements there for sure. That's going to really develop later. That's really going to develop with, let's take the Jewish faith and we're going to Xerox that thing, but we're going to attach it to a whole bunch of different elements, including Ishmael, not Isaac. So we're going to see all of that. But yes, that would include their ridiculous mistreatment of women. So yes, all that's coming. Good question. Makes sense though. She was just a handmaid, right? She was a nobody. So yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? I hope everyone's interested in this because we're going to stick with this for a few more weeks. I don't think it's any more timelier than it could be right now. This is really going to show us, like when they're chanting that, what does that mean? Well, it means from this river to this sea, eradication. It's a Holocaust. We're getting told that they're calling for a Holocaust. And they're doing it with pretty banners and fancy signs and big tents and college campuses. And there's white people chanting it. And they don't have any idea what they're saying. They don't have any idea what they're saying and how very much Nazi-esque this feels. But don't call them that. So yeah, we're going to get into all that. Yeah, no, you're good.
I was watching something on like Iran and like because we're talking about the Arabics and all that. So like Iran actually when we talk about war has all these soldiers ready and Hamas is actually really under all these different ones are all under Iran. Is I understand correct?
They're definitely funding it. They're funding a lot of this, and of course, sometime in 2016, we sent a plane full of cash to Iran, and they have nuclear or close to nuclear capabilities. So again, it's them flexing their muscle a little bit in funding a lot of this. If you look at these tents on college campuses, all these tents look the same. I don't know of any poor college student who they all have 50 of the same tents. So someone's funding this. Someone is backing this. Apparently it's George Soros. Also, I think when you have a major natural resource that you control, because now the world has become dependent on it, I think you can make some pretty quick cash pretty fast. And so because we're saying no to oil in this country and we're dependent on oil elsewhere, they can really hold us hostage. Little things like that have all grown in its challenges throughout time to bring us where we are now. for an Antichrist to come walking in and assume control over the planet has to be on a level playing field. Not two big major superpowers, not one big major superpower. It's got to be pretty level. And so that's what we see happening. We're seeing that. I mean, it's playing right before our eyes. It's all happening.
But isn't it odd that the vast majority of the Arab world is not supporting this?
Yeah.
Or at least up front,
Right.
showing the true colors, right? Because they are, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait,
Yeah.
Qatar. These are all Muslim nations,
Right.
that are taking a back seat to it.
Right.
Difference in the Shia and
Yeah. The Sunni and Shiite, and yeah. So yes, couldn't agree more. They're quiet right now. Just like Michigan is an uprising or Europe is an uprising, and that's a huge, huge Islamic population in those areas, right? And so, but once that horn gets blown and it's a rise up, that's part of what we'll study. It's in the Quran that's what they are to do. That there's a blinded loyalty to it no matter what. And when you get one leader in there who's going to assume control over it, that's even scarier, because now it's you will submit or I will cut your head off. So that's going to stink. But that's where we're headed. So it will be a submission or die. And that's why we're studying it as the trail of blood, because we see this thing still yet future. As bad as the trail of blood has been and is and will continue to be as we study it, there's a time still yet future that the world has never seen, which is still coming. And so that's why we're linking the two together. So, and while all this is going on in Europe and the Catholics are baptizing babies and all this other stuff, there's this other movement going on that was really important and will play even more so to the future, currently and future, even more prominent in the news than the Catholics are right now, or anyone else, any other Seventh-day Adventists or Methodists or Lutherans or anyone like that. It seems to be this battle that's dominating everything right now. And they've just got people falling in line, joining the mob mentality. So that's why we research this stuff. You can't just, okay, Palestine. Okay. What are you saying? I don't know. Where is Palestine? I don't know. What does it mean? I don't know.
I just said that, but they interviewed a lot of these college students, and they really don't know what they're protesting. And they're the first one, well, we really don't know. And when they're pressed for answers, they don't have.
They're talking about oppression. They're talking about going against the man, and they're at Columbia, which is a 200,000 a year school. So, okay. With your Jordans on and your $500 hoodies, and you're oppressed. Nice. Classic. Even so, come Lord Jesus, right? Let's just end this whole thing. Let's stand as we dismiss. Even so, come Lord Jesus. Well, we'll keep studying this. I don't want to deep dive into it. We're certainly not going to fall in line with it, but I at least want us to be aware how it began, where it originated, like get a good feel for it. And please understand this. This is really to get a feel for what our brethren went through, what was going on at that time. Soon, based on where we are in a few hundred years, there's going to be this crusade movement, which was which involves these people, a couple groups of people, which also involved our brethren. It also is important as a witnessing tool. So we use this as a witnessing tool. The more knowledge we have about it, then we don't seem like, well, they're all bad. Well, why? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, that's just as not knowing as chanting for it. Well, you're against it. Well, why? I don't know. Well, okay. So again, we're just comparing the fake dollar bill with the real dollar bill. And we're pretty good with the real dollar bill, but let's see what these fake dollar bills look like so we can be aware and notice the differences in what we're looking for. So that's it.